Bord Gáis Energy, proud sponsor of the GAA All-Ireland Under-20 and Senior Hurling Championships. Hashtag hurling to the core.
Hello and welcome to the Throw-In Independent.ie's GAA podcast in association with Bord Gáis Energy. I'm Will Slattery, delighted to be joined as always by Michael Verney. Michael, hello.
How are you, Will? I'm exhausted this morning, I won't lie. You'd wake up with a spring in your step, but also you'd just be like emotionally exhausted from everything over the weekend. Some weekend of action, in fairness.
It's funny, on Saturday night after the hurling matches and especially after the Dublin game, which was extremely one-sided, I was on the phone to a mate of mine and I was saying, God, like I'm actually not even that enthused tomorrow. I might actually, do something else. I might I might go for a walk or something. I'm so glad that I stuck around at the start of the Cork Tipp game, which kind of hooked me in for the rest of the day, because those results really came out of nowhere. And you couldn't have had such a more stark kind of juxtaposition between like the provincials are dead on Saturday night, like, oh, terrible. And then like Sunday night, you get two of the most amazing games in terms of shocks. Like it's like having the Clares 92, Leitrim 94 on one day almost. Maybe not quite as shocking, but it wasn't far off.
Yeah, in a WhatsApp group on Saturday night, the provincials were dead according to a lot of people, and on Sunday afternoon the provincials were alive and well. So yeah, it's great. It kind of I think it restored a lot of people's kind of faith in the GAA and the faith in anything can happen on a given day. It was unbelievable, and for like Mickey Graham is like a miracle worker, in fairness. Like, it's unbelievable between Mullinachta and Cavan what he's done, particularly with a relegation from Division 3 coming in. And it's been so hard to win Ulster through the preliminary rounds down through the years. Only a handful have done it, and Cavan do it against the head. Like, I picked a fantasy Gaelic team at the start of the year, and I had a good few Monaghan lads in it because I thought they'd get a run to the provincial final at least, and they're gone after the first day. And then Cavan win again and come behind against Down, and then they beat Donegal. Just on Donegal as well, interesting one. Like, I wonder does Declan Bonner's kind of term or reign come into question now? Are they underachieving for we would have talked like they absolutely blew Armagh to bits in the semi-final, and then they probably underachieve again just when the pressure is coming on. So that'll be an interesting one to be playing out over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, just the weekend belongs to Tipperary and Cavan. Phenomenal stuff.
Well, after a historic weekend in the football championship, we're delighted to be joined by Ciarán Whelan. Ciarán, how are things?
Good. Well, not a bother. Great weekend. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely brilliant. We'll let you decide which game to start with, I guess. There was two kind of droughts ended. Tipperary's a little longer at 85 years versus Cavan's 23. But in terms of the games, the Cavan upset was probably a bit bigger given how big favourites Donegal were. Like, for you, which is the one that's kind of caught your eye a bit more?
I think they both did. It was really our Super Sunday, really, to a certain degree. I suppose going into the game, you particularly the Tipperary game, you probably would have given Tipp a chance. Cork had kind of, yes, they'd beaten Kerry. It was a kind of a snatch and grab, really. Kerry probably had more chances to beat them, and you really didn't know where Cork were at. And coming into a game yesterday on a good surface, good weather, it was always going to be a bigger test for them, particularly when they were up against some quality Tipperary players. But I think the thing you can say in both games is that both teams deserve to win. They on the balance of play, Cavan outplayed Donegal, and similar to Tipperary and Cork. Cavan for me is probably stands out as a bigger upset. I don't think there is really anybody that gave Cavan a chance. Let's be very honest about that. Donegal were motoring so well, were so well organised. In some ways, maybe Donegal were predictable, where Cavan were unpredictable, and that may be what kind of made the difference at the end of the day. But I saw Cavan against Roscommon in the league game, where Roscommon made 8-9 changes. They were really poor. And then I also against Antrim, they struggled against Antrim, and then they had these heroic comebacks against Monaghan and Down. Just, it's an incredible story when you look at their journey, coming from the preliminary round, what they've had to do, the comebacks, and that's obviously just instilled that bit of belief. And Mickey Graham obviously has a bond there with his players that he's created this fighting spirit, and you could see it even at the third quarter yesterday. You could see him smiling, hugging his players. The game was in the melting pot, and they just performed for him, and they were heroic. They were warriors, every one of them, and the spread of scorers they had, everybody popped up, to do their bit. So an incredible weekend, and I think it really makes the championship worth having. We were kind of going into this championship when we were worried about no crowds being at the grounds, and I've been at a couple of grounds and they are eerie and it is different, and you're saying it's not the same, but yes, they made it all worthwhile, I think. And what it means to the people of Tipperary and Cavan, and they can't celebrate like they'd want to, but they'll still remember yesterday as a special days, and the whole emotion of it, I suppose, combined with the weekend that was with Bloody Sunday, the ironic that it's the same 4 provincial winners as 100 years. You just couldn't write that sort of stuff. So it was just an incredible day to be a GA follower and to see the passion, and for Tipperary and Cavan, brilliant stuff altogether.
Yes, simply sensational day, Michael. And if you look at the Cavan game first, I guess, in a little more detail, I think they trailed in against Monaghan at halftime, against Antrim at halftime, against Down at halftime, and against Donegal at halftime. And yet here they are, provincial champions for the first time since 1997. What did you make of the way the game developed yesterday? Like, Donegal had I think a 2-point lead at the break, but only kicked 3 points in the second half. There was the 2 black cards, the first of which Donegal really, I think kicked on and outscored them by 6 points, but Cavan actually outscored them by 1 after the second black card. So it was an interesting game. Like, what was the winning and losing of it for you?
I thought it was very strange in the sense that when the finishing line was in sight, I'm not saying like Donegal were kind of straitjacketed or anything like that, but it was like Cavan were vying for that finishing line. They were pushing for it, whereas Donegal were trying to almost hold on. It was kind of like Kerry against Cork. It's like the favourites under the weight of the pressure and everything seemed to be getting to Donegal, whereas Cavan really, really took it on and they just embraced it really. And a couple of guys really, really stand out. It was a great save from Ray Galligan there at one stage. And then his brother Thomas at the other end. Well, not even at the other end. He was everywhere. He was absolutely everywhere. And even the interview after with the bloodied eye and everything, it was just, Cavan just threw themselves into absolutely everything. They were just ravenous in the tackle. Same as Tipp. They're just like, I know it's very, very simplistic to say it, but the two teams that won yesterday, the two provincial football highs, they just seemed to wanted a bit more. The energy they had all over the field, tackling in absolute droves, and it's just funny when you look at it that 2 Division 3 sides basically winning provincial titles. And like, nobody could have predicted that. Division 1 or 2 is where it's all at to be competitive, usually at the latter stages of the championship. Yet we have 2 Division 3 sides in the All-Ireland semi-finals. And as Ciarán said there, like, while maybe people would think it's a lot more predictable now that they would be predicting a Dublin Mayo final, and maybe they would have predicted that anyway. What the joy and happiness that Cavan and Tipp have brought is just like, people will be talking about this for days, months, and years to come. And even the interviews after with Ray Galligan and with Mickey Graham just broke down in several interviews after. That's what it means. And imagine going around like living rooms all around the country. Imagine the GA goggle box. Imagine the videos coming back in. I'd say they're absolutely phenomenal. But Cavan the energy they had and the coolness to take some scores. Oisin Pearson got a score off his left foot down with a sideline, absolutely outrageous score. Didn't even take a solo or a hop or anything like that. Just some brilliant scores on a magical day.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the individual players there. I don't think Cavan have won an All-Star since the 90s. I think they've only ever won one with Dermot McCabe. So even if some of the individual players got some recognition at the end of the year, would be really nice to see. And Ciarán, I guess, while Cavan were the big story and the heroics and the joy, on the flip side, Donegal, were coming into the game, everyone talking about them as Dublin's biggest challenger. For the 3rd year in a row under Declan Bonner, they failed to make a semi-final, despite at times being really, really good to watch. Where does this result leave them? Like, did they maybe get a bit too far ahead of themselves, looking towards Dublin? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, possibly, but I'd say it leaves them fairly shell-shocked, if I'm being honest. But I thought it was very easy to see in the first 7-8 minutes you were looking at the game and you were saying, Donegal are not at this. They're not at the right level. They're not at the right tempo. They're not engaging Cavan in the tackle. Cavan got off to a much stronger start, kicked those 3-4 points. Asked questions of Donegal straight away, and you were looking at Donegal and you were thinking they're flat. There's something wrong, and they did lift it in the second quarter. But like, a lot of that had to do, obviously, the Killian Brady black card was a little bit harsh, but there was a period in that third quarter where they racked off, or second quarter where they racked off 6-7 points, and you were kind of thinking, yeah, they're beginning to up it. They're beginning to get to the level that we know we are. They're beginning to bring their key players into the game, and they're picking off scores. But Cavan, I suppose, going in at half time behind was probably the perfect situation as well, because, you know, maybe Donegal still felt, yeah, we're grinding these lads down. We're going to kick on in the second quarter, rather than possibly being a couple of points down and Declan Bonner being able to give them a rocket and get them going in the second half. And Cavan came out in the second half, and it's fascinating because when you look at the statistics of the game, when you look at the core statistics in terms of kickouts won and stuff like that, Donegal probably done fairly well in that middle third, but it was Cavan's rawness in the tackle and turnovers. Like, they turned over Donegal, I think, 26 times. They got 7 points off it. And Donegal made a lot of mistakes in the last third. And Cavan set themselves up, I thought, very well to force Donegal's into those mistakes. And it was their work rate, their energy, as Michael alludes to. But they also held a threat up top, and they were willing to put that early, long, direct ball in. And, you know, you had the likes of Conor Madden, like what the strength game he had, and that he was brought on as a as a blood sub twice. Then he had his own black card. He still finished at 1-2. You know what I mean? And when he came on initially, you were kind of going, you were saying, keep him on. This guy is going to cause Donegal problems. You know. So it was a case of kind of grinding it out, and you know, the Galligan point really typified, I thought, I suppose, what Cavan were about. A long ball went in. He probably didn't deserve to win it. He gets it. He flicks it up. A great pickup, and turns unorthodoxly and bangs it straight over the bar. And that was a statement of saying, guys, we have these. And as the second half developed, I think Donegal actually were shell-shocked, didn't know what hit them. And they started reverting back. They had 15 men behind the ball. They had no options up front themselves. They lost all the cohesion they normally have in their attack and their patience. And I think they kind of panicked a bit. They hadn't been put in that situation where they had to grind out a win. And as I said, Cavan went on then and stole it, and fully deservedly so, because they wanted it more. They wanted it more. That was the bottom line. You know, they had, you know, I think Mickey Graham's ability to, as I said, to mix it up and the unpredictability of it, and be able to move players in and out of that full forward line. They definitely optimized their tactics in trying to upset Donegal, and I think they had 9 scores. Guys popped up from everywhere to be able to take scores. So, listen, fully deserved victory for them, and you know, as you said, the emotion afterwards was just brilliant to see. But Donegal will be left. You know, that's 2 years in a row, a flat performance last year in Mayo. You know, the last few years Donegal have looked like they've been making progress, but for some reason they seem to hit a flat performance. But they didn't deserve to win yesterday. They were outplayed.
Yeah, and Mickey Graham, you know, after leading Mulliniochta to a Leinster club in 2018, he's probably had 2 of the most unlikely provincial triumphs over the last, you know, 10, 15 years. And then earlier in the day, Michael, obviously Tipperary, you know, seeing off Cork, as Ciarán said earlier. So when you're looking at that match on paper, it probably was much more closer than we probably gave it credit for going into it. If you even look at the team sheets, the quality of players like Conor Sweeney and Michael Quinlivan, 2 forwards that, if you're looking at maybe weaker counties traditionally, probably wouldn't have that scoring power that Tipp have at their fingertips. You know, what did you make of that game in terms of, you know, Cork never really got into it besides a period in the second half when it looked like they were making a comeback?
Yeah, like people probably might forget, like Tipp beat Cork in the championship only 4 years ago, and they were beating a score then down in Park Irene in the 17 match where they played them. Like, so Cork, rather, if it had been Kerry, like you would imagine, like Tipp haven't matched up well against Kerry at all, and Kerry would have been able to keep them at arm's length. But there was no fear of Cork going into the game. And I suppose, as you mentioned, when you have Sweeney and Quinlivan, like Quinlivan takes on a point there, the outside of his right foot, underneath the stand. That was the type of confidence that they were kind of showing yesterday. He just every time he took on a shot, you kind of thought it was going to go over the bar. And even when Micheál Martin misplaced that kick out, you're kind of thinking the ball was going to end up over his head in the net as well. That was kind of the day it was for them. And even the stars just kind of aligning the way it worked out, with obviously, you know, the bloody Sunday weekend, Colin O'Riordan being available, having not been available for their game against Clare or their game against Limerick as well. That was huge, and he was every inch a professional athlete out there yesterday, just able to break tackles, particularly in that last quarter. He did a huge last quarter. It was a big catch. He won a free at one stage as well, won a 45 as well. And they just, like Tipp wouldn't have feared Cork going into that. As I said, they would have had good success against them underage. It's funny, like when you look at it, Colin O'Riordan has nearly been associated with all the great things that have happened with Tipp football in the last decade. David Power, the same. It was phenomenal, really. And it wasn't like, a come from behind win or anything like that. They were kind of always in control. And the only way Cork were going to get out of it was if they were going to produce something like that Marquine goal or something at the end. But again, Tipp just had that bit of a swagger about them. It's almost like that they almost believed that the stars were aligning for them. The different jerseys, a different kind of mentality, and it was class. Yeah, it was brilliant. To just even see, like, it's hard to beat that emotion after Colin O'Riordan in tears doing interviews after. Like that's what it's all about. And you had people calling for the GA championships not to go ahead. Like, imagine like the joy that will bring to people between now and Christmas and between now and God knows how long. And it's great that we have it to discuss here on a Monday morning. And it's great that the players are kind of putting their lives on hold to some respect to make sure that they can bring that joy to people. Joy and despair, obviously, because it's good and the bad, agony and ecstasy on both sides. But Tipp were just brilliant from start to finish and never really looked like losing that game.
Yeah, which is surprising, Ciarán, because Cork were the favourites, having seen off Kerry, even though it took a late goal to do it. Like, what did you make of their challenge yesterday? I think a lot of people, I did expect them to progress to the semi-final and face Mayo, but as Michael said, they really didn't deserve to win, and there was only a couple of moments where they were on top.
No, they were hugely disappointing. Well, really, I have to say, it was a really poor Cork performance. But, again, if you're to look at going into the game and you're to kind of say, right, well, the top class forwards on the Tipperary team, you had Sweeney and Quinlan, who are probably a little bit more consistent, and Cork are going into it and you're saying, well, who's going to stand up for us? Who are going to be you're relying on Luke Connolly, and he was a bit of a loss because Luke was a confidence player who was on a bit of a blow, and you're hoping that Hurley's going to hit a blow inside, you know what I mean? But they don't really have the same level of consistency in terms of performance probably that Tipp have. And the other question is, you go in against top teams, you should have one or two really good man markers that should be able to try and nullify the influence of opposition key players, and they didn't seem to have that. So like for me, Tipperary, because they had the quality up front, they had Sweeney, they had Quinlan, they were able to move. They moved the ball a lot better. There was the movement in the Tipperary forward line was much better, and they were able to get that pop pass into the forwards and get the support runners coming through. And I think the way they set up in midfield, obviously, because that would have been one of Cork's strengths. They went long against Kerry and they turned it into a bit of a war of attrition in the middle of the park. But I thought, like yesterday, you had like Liam Casey was brilliant, and you had Stephen O'Brien, you had Colin O'Riordan. They played kind of three across the middle, and they were willing to try and go and win that battle. And they might have struggled in the first 10-15 minutes. Was the game grew on, Tipperary took over in that space, and particularly O'Riordan in the second half, the balls that he plucked out of the sky. So Tipperary being able to match Cork and beat them in midfield, to give them the platform to get the balls into the quality forwards, that essentially was the win in the game. From a Cork perspective, like, the movement of their inside forwards at times was just awful. You were watching it and you were they were going back, they were very slow in their build-up play, which allowed Tipperary regroup and put a wall across the 50. But the inside movement, there was no options for them at times, and it allowed Tipperary then to eventually turn them over. And Fahy was brilliant at centre back, driving them forward then on the break. So listen, it wasn't a huge surprise for me, but still it's massive. You know what I mean? The context of Tipperary winning a Munster title, and I think if football had went ahead normally this year, they probably wouldn't have had O'Riordan, they wouldn't have had Quinlan, they wouldn't have had some of the players, and that's the thing that makes it kind of special, that as Michael said, the stars aligned to them, that the championship went ahead at this time. They had probably their best team on the field of play, but they were also backed by guys that won a minor title. A lot of those guys, played in 2011, won Munster titles. They know they would never have feared Cork. So it's massive for Tipperary football, and they'll go in to the All-Ireland semi-final with a free shot. Mayo, as we know, you would expect are at a higher level, but they're still going through transition, and there's going to be guys coming up to play in Croke Park for the first time. Like that game is set up for a brilliant contest, and Tipperary won't fear them.
Yeah, it should be an interesting game. And Michael, I suppose we had the positives of the provincial championships at the weekend, and then on Saturday night we had a bit of the opposite, Dublin Meath. Like at the water break, it was over. It was 2-12 to 2 points at the break. I don't think Dublin have probably looked as dominant against Meath in probably ever. Like what? It's hard to know what to say. I know Ciarán was on RTE with Pascalan. I don't think they didn't really knew how to analyse it either.
Yeah, no, it was just Dublin are just getting better and better as the championship goes on. I think most people coming in, you probably would have thought, Meath had 12 goals in their past 2 games, had put it up to Dublin in that league game, a high scoring kind of league game. And no, Dublin just ripped them apart. You knew once Dean Rock's goal went in, you knew the game was essentially over, and they just kept going and going and going at them. A couple of interesting tactics, I think, even from that game. Con was playing an awful lot deeper at different stages, and he was the target man for a lot of kickouts as well down that middle, where there was a lot of guys moving towards the flank, and he'd kind of make a dart to the middle. And we definitely take it for granted, but Cluxton's ability just to pick out a lad from 80 or 90 yards and put it into the breadbasket is absolutely phenomenal, and they were just brilliant at that the other night. A lot of the new guys even coming in were very, very good. It just looks like the machine is just moving on, exactly as it should. Nothing, a new manager, new players, experienced players leaving the dressing rooms like Brogan, Connolly, Owen O'Gara, Darren Daly, and even though I know he's still involved in the backroom team, I thought these things might have had an effect. Doesn't look like they've had any effect. Just outstanding from start to finish. Like from a Meath point of view, not really sure. Like Andy McEntee wasn't. He didn't really want to do interviews or anything after, and I wouldn't blame him. I'd say like they came with a good bit of optimism. They would have been thinking, if we can get to the hour mark and be competitive, even if Dublin pull away, it'll be progress. And now they're back exactly where they were. It's even worse probably than last year's Leinster final. So from a Dublin point of view, it just the train just keeps rolling on the tracks. From a me point of view, just really, really disappointing. Just weren't able to really lay a glove on Dublin, and didn't ask any questions of them. And I think that's the most disappointing thing. They didn't even get an opportunity almost to ask questions of them. Dublin, once they got on top earlier on, the game was over, and it was over with the first water break. It was completely over as a contest. Same old Dublin, while other things have changed in other provinces, and the power has changed in other counties. It's the same old Dublin and Leinster.
Yeah, Ciarán, I suppose that's what made it so stark, is that like Meath came in, especially after hitting all those goals, there was an expectation that maybe that might be an avenue to make it a somewhat competitive game. They played in the league. I know it was only the league, but it was a couple of weeks ago. It was a pretty competitive match as well. And then for the game to be over 15, 20 minutes in at most, it kind of let people. So it was a great double performance, but pretty unfulfilled.
Yeah, they ran into the Dublin machine that was performing well and was probably in a couple of gears higher than it was in previous weeks. And Dublin were excellent. Desi Farrell will be very, very happy with the level of intensity they brought to the game, and particularly their transition from attack to defence and then to attack when required. How they can move their team and get their setup within a few seconds is incredible. And Meath probably needed, I said it on Saturday night, they needed a fast start. They needed something to give them a bit of oxygen, a bit of confidence. And they did create the goal opportunity at the start. Like, it was still very well closed down by Cluxton from a defensive perspective. But you're thinking, yeah, this has to hit the onion sack, and all of a sudden they'll grow a couple of inches and they'll start believing. And then Dublin go down a couple of minutes later and stick one in straight down the middle, down the heart of the fence, and immediately that's game over. Like the biggest thing that's stuck out for me, I know we were expecting a lot more from me, no doubt about it, and they would have taken a lot from the league game, and you feel, they're on an upward curve, and everybody probably hoped that they would put it up to Dublin. But the biggest thing that it was evident for me on Saturday night was that Meath are probably coming into this game on the back of a couple of championship games where when you get the ball, you probably have a couple of seconds to think what you're going to do with it. Where you're going to pick a pass, you're going to take the man on, you're going to take a shot on. You're going into an environment where you actually have a second probably to think what you're going to do with the ball, because the Dublin are just so intense, and the way they're all over you, and all of a sudden there's contact, there's press, and you're put into a panic situation. And that's what happened. I think they dropped a lot short. They panicked in possession because that level of intensity was just at a different level that probably they've experienced in all their games this year, even including the league game in Parnell, because that was Dublin's first game back. So they just couldn't cope with the level of intensities that Dublin brought to the game. And Desi Farrell will be that would be the biggest pleasing thing from his perspective. That they were sloppy at times against Laois, but he'd be really, really happy with how efficient they were in attack, particularly in that first 20-25 minutes. But more importantly, how they regrouped and got back, and how the numbers got back to support the defence when Meath did try to get early ball in. So yeah, it was a mismatch and disappointing. Expected a lot more from Meath, and it's I suppose you look at Dublin. If Dublin were in any other province, they'd probably be doing the same. But it is psychologically damaging to Leinster teams, because every year you're setting out on your path and you're thinking you have this machine to get over at some point, and it makes it difficult because maybe they don't have that opportunity like a Tipperary and a Cavan have to come from somewhere and win a provincial title, and all of a sudden it does so much for the football in the county. So it's that's I suppose the challenge, that Dublin are just so far ahead of the rest of them at the moment, and it doesn't make for the same level of entertainment as we got yesterday, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ross Munley is the only player outside of Dublin who's still playing and who has a Leinster medal, which shows, I suppose, just how dominant they have been in the province. But I suppose for now we'll dwell on Tipperary and Cavan and their success as we look ahead to the next couple of weeks. But for the moment, Ciarán, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, no problem, guys.
It's time for hurling now, but first, don't forget to share your Gaga Box moments on Twitter using the hashtag hurling to the core to be with a chance of winning unmissable rewards with thanks to Board Gosh Energy. And we're now joined on the line by Brendan Cummins. But before we get into the quarterfinal action over the weekend, Brendan, first, Tipperary's historic day in football yesterday, winning their first Munster title since, I think, 1935. And I know you would have been in that football camp for many years during your time as a player. Like, what did you make of what was an extremely emotional and historic day for the county?
Yeah, look, it was massive. I think we should do the whole show and podcast on Tipperary football and the way that the long wait. But no, it has been. I was involved in 2002 when we drew with Cork in Thurles, and then obviously got hammered in the replay. But yesterday was very, very special. You had, the Croke Park thing and the 100 years and all that, and the different jerseys, and then you had a group of players who were ready to win. And I think David Powers touched on it. He's been involved with them at underage. They've had a bit of heartache, like Fox had lost that under 21 final the last couple of minutes by Cork. So, and then you Colin O'Riordan. So you had everything rolled into one. And like I say, when you forwards like Sweeney and Quinlivan and these lads, with the work rate that's around in the middle of the field, you always have a chance. And I certainly thought when Cork beat Kerry that Tipperary footballers would have a huge chance, because the reality is they're not overly afraid of playing Cork because they would have beaten them at stages in the past. And it was just amazing scenes after the game. It was really, really emotional. As somebody who's heavily involved in Tip football for years, playing and all that, it was really special.
Yeah, Brendan, obviously, you're so steeped in hurling as well in the county. You'll know the place football holds. It probably is behind hurling, a good bit, to be fair. But what does a victory like this do for football in the county? Like, how much more visible will it be? Do you think it'll encourage people to pick up a football now as well as a hurl?
I think it will. I think, in fairness to the footballers, the one thing, even when I was playing with them back in the day, they never felt sorry for themselves. And I think that's really key. They never thought that they were, we're the poor relation, we're wasting our time here. You had unbelievable people, like they mentioned, Mick Frawley and lads like that, have put in a huge amount of work behind the scenes. I'd rest them now, and it's for people like them really in the long run that kept the torch alight. And like I said, that now it does a huge amount, because it really, really shows that, look, at the end of the day, there is a possibility and a potential to have success playing the football as well at senior inter-county level. So, of course, it's going to give a huge boost to it. But I would say that in the football parts of the parish down here around South Tip and all, there are kids anyway waking up in the morning going, I'd love to play football for Tipperary, and not being too shy about saying it.
Yeah, I suppose it was a great weekend for the footballers, less so for the hurlers, Brendan. Galway Tip, it was a classic encounter once again. Tipperary coming out on the wrong side of a Galway, progressing to the All-Ireland semi-final. Like, how did you assess the game? There was a lot of ebbs and flows. It looked like Tip were in the ascendancy until that late goal from Aidan Hard. It was a cracking game, but what are your thoughts?
Look, Tipperary was the best performance in Tipperary all year, and that's probably the saddest thing about it afterwards, that we're just starting to find our mojo, I suppose. Now, Tipperary, up until about the 15th minute or so, they were going quite well. There was a very strong breeze down in the Gaelic grounds now as well. And I felt they kind of weathered that initial push in the second half from Galway. But I don't think there's any doubt that the Cathal Barrett sending off had a huge factor in the game. The more I look at it, the more I think that he made an honest effort to play the ball off of Cannon and then clipped him on the back of the shoulder with the hurley. But either way, I suppose that's the way the breaks are. And certainly Galway showed huge ambition, I thought. Daithí Burke was struggling in the initial stage with Seamie Callanan, but the experienced defender that he is, he found his feet, and I think that was a bit of a launch pad for the rest of the Galway team to get a bit of heart. I think Shane O'Neill showed great management, really, I suppose, in the way he took David Burke off. He had his distribution wasn't great in that first period of the match, and he reckoned we need something different in there, and it's not easy to take off your sweeper. But overall, Galway's had a goal threat. And I think that was the real key difference this time round. In Croke Park, we saw them against Kilkenny, and something I complained about a lot after the match was they had huge possession, but never really threatened to get a goal. Every time the ball went inside the 21 on Saturday afternoon, Galway looked like they were going to get goals. So it really puts them in good stead now going into the Ireland semi-final next weekend.
Yeah, Michael, how do you assess things? Like there was moments in the game where it looked like Tipp were on top, then Galway were on top. There was a few little runs here and there, and it came down to the very end. It could have gone either way.
Yeah, no, it came down to the very end. I suppose Galway were very cool in the sense that they knew they had a free man, and they kept trying to force opportunities where they were, taking on the Tipp defence, and there was always going to be someone left over. And I suppose Aidan Hart probably didn't think he was going to find himself in that sort of a position. He was cute enough, as Brendan had known, to put the ball down in front of the goalie so that it was flying back up. And maybe Brian Hogan would be disappointed, but the more than one of the goals Stephen O'Keefe conceded later on that afternoon, he gave himself the best chance by putting it down there. Goalies don't like the ball generally down there. Anywhere up here or up shoulder high is easier to save. I have a big issue with the Barrett sending off. I have to say, I think the first yellow card was, like, I genuinely would be fearful for where the game is going or where it'll be in 10 years if those are the sort of offences, in inverted commas, that are earning yellow cards. I did a piece with Ben O'Connor, the former Cork hurler, during the week, and he said he believes manliness has been taken out of the game. I think that, like, many officials want hurling to be non-contact, and like, it's the fastest field sport in the world. Lads are going to get knocks, but as long as there's no, like, can anyone tell me that Cathal Barrett, there was any bit of dirtiness in anything that he did the other day? There was no bad slaps. There was nothing like that. I just couldn't have that as two yellows to pick up a red, particularly the first one. And that completely changed the game. Aidan Hart wouldn't have been where he was to score the goal if they didn't have an extra man. And it was bad for Barrett. Some people are saying it's karma from the All-Ireland final last year, which is absolutely ridiculous, with that Richie Hogan sending off, because he was obviously the one involved in that. But yeah, I just think it completely turned the game, and I'd have a genuine fear for hurling down the line if those are the sort of things that are picking up yellow cards and ending up with a guy off the pitch.
Yeah, there was another incident, and I was obviously on co-coms, and I was afraid of my life because Jake Morris came back and hooked Cathal Mannion, and in the process of hooking him, he clipped the side of his helmet. Now, under the real rules of the game, if we take what happened to Cathal Barrett, who made an honest attempt to hit the ball, just missed and clipped Cannon down the shoulder, then I thought Jake Morris was going to be in serious bother. Now, thankfully, he wasn't, but I didn't see a massive difference between that incident and an honest attempt to hook somebody as an honest attempt to bat the ball. And maybe that's where the massive frustration, I suppose, comes in for past players, pundits, you name it, and players themselves will be very, very, very sore when they see that little bit of inconsistency.
Yeah, Brent, but I also heard you, I think, almost biting your tongue towards the end. I can't remember which Tipperary forward was going in on goal, and I think it was Aidan Hart just rugby tackled him to the ground. And I think you were like, kind of in two minds whether you wanted to bring up, the cynical fouling issue with the game and the melting pot, but I could tell it was on the tip of your tongue.
Of course it is. And I said it on the Sunday game, the very first night it was on. I said the players have a responsibility now to keep the spirit of the game. Otherwise, the rule makers have to step in. And that is, for me, for sure what's going to happen. It just has to. I don't know, do we need to do a Zoom Congress in January or February or whatever it takes to get it in. But the more I'm seeing players being pulled down, the more I'm thinking the sin bin has to come in for that type of cynical foul. We have to cut it out of the game. We've seen it more often from when I think it was Schutte, the Dublin hurler, or Sutcliffe, whichever one, clipped the one of the players going through with the hurling, and that was the first shots fired, and we see it in every game. And to be honest with you, if I'm inside in the goals, I'm roaring, pull them down, and it's as simple as that. That is the kind of contradiction. We can all have the romance of the game and all that, but if you're training for 6 months and you've trained all through lockdown, you've done all that kind of stuff, if it means whipping them down like the Galway player did, fine, but I just think the consequences have to be greater than what they are to cut it out in future.
Yeah, Michael, where do you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in lads being dragged down like that. I'd be trying to punish them on the scoreboard more than anything else. And I think I'd have no issue with the boundaries for where a penalty can occur to be even brought out to the 21 if it was something like that. I'd be trying to punish teams on the scoreboard nearly. They know that if they pull someone down, even if it's 25 yards out, I would say it's kind of a ropey one, but if the referee deems it as, you know, they're denying a genuine goal scoring opportunity with a cynical foul, I'd be punishing it with a penalty. That's what I'd be doing, and maybe a yellow card and a penalty. And I tell you, if you're conceding penalties every time you're pulling a lad down, particularly if it's something like that, like Callan was about 25 yards down, I think that would probably deter guys from doing it as well to some extent. But I'd be all for punishing them on the scoreboard without a doubt, yeah.
And Brendan, just looking at Tipperary now and where they go from here, obviously they got that All-Ireland last year with the kind of the core of that team that have been there for a long time. Now, like, where do you see the team moving? Will they stick with these experienced guys? Will they look to bring in some of the under-20 and under-21 All-Ireland winners? I know a couple of them have come in, but maybe more of those guys. How do you think Liam Sheedy will play it?
I think it's a huge opportunity for Tipperary. Definitely there are going to be a team in transition. I wouldn't be writing off the older lads that are in the panel. They still have something definitely to offer. I mean, if you look at Kevin Moran last year, everybody said, sure, he's finished. And then look at him in Tom Morrissey. So it's amazing when you get young blood and fresh legs around these experienced players, how it's going to rejuvenate them. Now, Tipperary certainly have, I suppose, a backup or a bank of good players who won All-Ireland under 21s and under 20s. So those guys must be champing at the bit now, and they'll have a National League next year. And no matter man, the Liam Sheedy and Eamon O'Shea and Tommy Dunn and the backroom team, Darragh Egan, to blood those guys in. And they will see an opportunity. I was a young player coming on, obviously, in 1995 with Fox and English, and the boys were facing the end of their career. There's no doubt I thought to myself going in, this is a time for a new generation to take up the baton now. And certainly I hope that's the attitude that the young players will take in Tip. And look, I'm sure they will. But certainly, yes, I think transition is probably the word that will be bandied around a lot into January and February about this Tipperary senior hurling team going into 2021.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Liam Sheedy plays that one. And Michael, the other quarterfinal, Waterford versus Clare, another very impressive victory for Waterford under Liam Cahill. You know, Desi Hutchinson has had a cracking championship with 2 more goals. You know, they have Kilkenny now. They've had a lot of interesting games with them over the last number of years, albeit this is a slightly new Waterford team. But how impressed were you with their game over Clare?
Yeah, very impressed, because like if you look at it, this is, you know, largely the same personnel that were only able to put up 10 points against Limerick in the Munster Championship last year in Walsh Park. Their scoring averages are absolutely through the roof. I think they've averaged 29 points in their 3 championship games under Liam Cahill this year. And like, one of my reservations with Waterford coming in would have been, you know, they don't have a Joe Canning or a Seamus Callan or a TJ Reid, but they have an awful lot of guys really, really chipping in. And in general, they're, you know, tossing the ball around to the guy that's in the best position. And Desi Hutchinson is a classic example of that. He scored 2-2 the other night, set up a load of really good chances as well. The energy and the kind of ravenous work rate that Cahill has brought to it, like you couldn't have really envisaged how much things would change within, you know, probably about 18 months. They're absolutely flying now. They're just absolutely mad for work everywhere. And I think they'll be hugely optimistic going in against Kilkenny. Kilkenny probably won a Leinster title almost against the head. They didn't play particularly well. It was in the last 10 or 15 minutes where they really kicked on. And like, will Waterford really fear that Kilkenny team? It's not like they're coming up against, you know, a Limerick or even potentially, you know, a Tipperary or a Galway. And I think they'll definitely see it as a massive opportunity. Now, I think it might come a tiny bit too soon for them. But to look back, I think this is they're kind of maybe where Waterford were in 2016 as opposed to where Waterford were in 2017. I think Kilkenny will still get over the line, but it's a massive opportunity for them. And yeah, the scores they're putting up, like everybody was talking, all the doomsday sayers before a couple of weeks ago were saying like hurling has turned into ping pong and teams only want to score points and this kind of crack. I mean, an absolute bag of goals at the weekend. I mean, 6 goals in that game between Waterford and Clare. And it's funny, like hurling was probably overshadowed by football on Sunday. But the hurling at the weekend was savage, massive scores put up. And from a Waterford point of view, I think they'll be full of confidence going into the weekend. They're robbed of an extra day's recovery, which is probably tough on them because they're on the road now a good while. But they'll definitely see it as a big chance.
Yeah, Brendan, like what do you put this turnaround down to? Because as Michael said, a lot of the same personnel. Liam Call's come in. It's obviously been an extremely disrupted year, but they've looked so much different to the kind of the poor performances of the previous couple of campaigns.
Tying the burqa is the answer, I think, fairly straight and simple. When Derek McGrath was in his last year, Waterford limped along. Padraig Fanning, Waterford limped along. Liam Cahill comes in. There's no doubt he's had a huge influence. Himself and Mikey Beavens have been fantastic with them. But when you get Tied the burqa back in there, centre back, to see that red helmet, and I think it was Derek McGrath said about the system in Waterford, Tied the burqa knows and he gets the ball 50 yards from his own goals not to hit it. You get other guys playing that role, they'll strike it up the field. We saw David Burke the weekend, he just hit it. De Burqa won't do that. And then you Callum Lyons as well on the other wing beside him, two absolute energizer bunnies. Like they just run, and they'll run the ball up the middle of the pitch, they'll break tackles, they'll cause overlaps, and then they'll hand pass the ball to the Bennetts. And the Bennetts will do the rest. And I think a big change as well for Waterford is that Desi Hutchinson is inside now, and he's a poacher, and he's patient, and like every other killer like that, he'll wait. Now, the other day, the ball popped in over the top. They said, oh, he's lucky to get onto it. That's crap for me because he saw the opportunity. He waited for it to go over the top. Bit like what Lark Corbett used to do with Tipp. And it's a composed finish to the back of the net. He passes the ball home and that shows a guy that's in full flow. And the last thing I'll say on Waterford is Liam Cahill, when Waterford get inside 20, 25 yards, they have that Tipperary instinct that Liam would have seen with the under-20s and 21s. Goals are the only currency. And you saw Bennett against Limerick a little bit. He got the ball above at the town end and he cut inside rather than hitting it over the bar to see was there a goal on. And he took that as the last, I suppose, resort to hit the ball over the bar. And that for me was a little sign. And they developed it even more then against Clare. When the opportunities came, they just killed Clare with goals.
Hey, you're clinging on to Waterford now with the Tipperary element to it. I knew there was something there with you. You'll be shouting for them for the rest of the championship now.
Yeah, but sure, yeah, should I play Kilkenny now? I'm going to have to back Kilkenny because every other time I back the team Kilkenny are playing, Kilkenny have won. So I'll be all guns blazing for Kilkenny, hoping the Dacian might be able to jump the fence. And God knows, in a year that we've had with Cavan and the romance of Tipperary and all yesterday, you'd never know with Waterford and Croke Park with the energy they have, they may be able to overpower Kilkenny.
And Michael, just a word on Clare, considering they came into the championship down so many key men, it's been a pretty positive campaign for them. And like even yesterday on Sunday or Saturday, rather, Tony Kelly picking up that knock, he was definitely hampered. Like he had probably one of the great individual campaigns we've seen over the last while. So how would you assess their championship?
Massive progress. I would have totally written off Clare before the start, and I won't hesitate to say that. I definitely did. They have unearthed a good few guys as well as a result of missing Galvin and Conlon and Duggan and a few more, Podge Collins, Rory Hayes. I thought Desi Hutchinson gave him trouble the other day, but he fronted up against them and did as best as he could, considering it was kind of one-on-one battle and there was a lot of space between the two of them. I think Cottle Malone was absolutely outstanding again the other day. Probably not the most aesthetically pleasing looking player, but Jizzy was brilliant. He hit over 4 big points. Even Aaron Shannon kind of showed up the other day when they needed someone else to stand up. Tony Kelly, I'd have to say to him, in fairness to him again the other day, like I thought he was in awful trouble. I didn't see him being able to get back onto the pitch, or if I did, I thought he'd be limping back out 5 or 10 minutes after, and he clearly wasn't. He was totally hampered. But even he still delivered a decent performance. Obviously not to compare with the 3 that came before that, but like whoever's picking the All-Stars this year, there's only 5 forward spots to be picked from, because there is no way, even though he was quiet-ish the other day, there's no way he doesn't pick up an All-Star. From Brian Lohan's point of view, I think he kind of had a fool's pardon almost coming into this year with the amount of faces that he was missing. But as I said, he's unearthed a few more, and if he gets all those guys back next year, they'll be a fair force. There was talk of John Conlon possibly featuring at the weekend. Now he didn't, but he'll be ready to go for the league next year. They'll be hoping to get Duggan back as well, and they'll be hoping to get Colm Galvin back too. They've played the long game with him. He obviously went and got surgery or rehabbing his injury, and he'll be back, and maybe Podge will be back as well. So yeah, a very, very promising year from Clare, from probably low expectations. So they definitely exceeded maybe any expectations anyone had for them.
Yeah, definitely getting to the last 8 with all those absentees is good going. And Brendan, just before we finish up, you mentioned, I suppose, some fairy tale days over the weekend. Huge day for Kerry hurling as well, into the John McDonagh Cup final. 1 game away from getting promoted after their victory over Carlow. They play Antrim in the final. I know you, I suppose, got some comments on social media as well about not being there on Saturday. I don't know what you want to address that, or what do you make of the victory in general?
No, it was a fantastic victory. As the social media stuff, to be honest, to me, that's kind of background noise. That my mansable to the players, and I was so proud of what they did. I was with them obviously on Friday night, and I've been involved in Fintan O'Connor's backroom team, and been through, I suppose, all the highs and lows of Kerry. My relationship with Kerry started with Eamon Kelly back in 2014 for a few years, and the last 3 years I've been down there, and it's just absolutely fantastic that those boys are heading to Croke Park. I said, I've seen the amount of work that they put in. Like, it'll be playing Antrim again, which, let's be honest about it, Antrim beaten us the last 3-4 times now. I think that we've played them, including last year's championship. Darren Gleeson has done massive work with him. But it's just huge, and it's great to be looking forward to it now, back down training again now tomorrow night. So the next 3 weeks is going to be an awful lot of hard work to see if we can topple Antrim, because I said there's no doubt we're really up against them. They're a formidable force. But it is really, I suppose, gotten the work that these players have put in now. They're starting to get a bit of the rewards from it, but they'll know as I know that the job isn't near done until we turn up and perform in Croke Park.
Just a word, Brendan, on potentially the winners will go into Leinster. Obviously, Kerry going into Leinster would be unusual, to say the least.
Yeah, it would be great, but I suppose, yeah, it's easy for you to talk about that, but when you're stuck in the middle of the fight, I don't think we're worried too much about anything else other than preparing for Antrim. To be honest with you, the amount of work, as I said, has been put in with the group, but it certainly would be nice if that was what this group had to look forward to next year. But there's a serious hurdle to get over first in Croke Park before our Ireland final day, and these Antrim boys, before we can look anything beyond that.
Well, it's set up to be a very memorable day in Croke Park regardless. Brendan, thanks so much for joining us.
No problem at all.
And that's all we have time for this week on The Throne, in association with Board Gosh Energy. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week with another podcast reviewing all the All-Ireland hurling semi-final action. And in the meantime, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud, iTunes, or listen on independent.ie. So until next week, thanks for listening, and goodbye.